So something a little different today. I'm the one being interviewed by the wonderful Dr. Maria Kempinkska. Maria approached me a few weeks ago, said she'd come across my podcast and she was inspired by my resilience and enthusiasm despite what I'm going through in terms of the courts, etc. So, in this very, very candid interview, you get to hear more about my backstory, all the way back to when I was married and what happened there. More recently, to an abusive relationship before I explosively got out of that one, and how that's obviously affected things and changed the trajectory of my life, certainly over the last 18 months, and led me to meeting the wonderful Mick Butler, who a lot of you already know who Mick is. Maria, some of you are old enough to remember the Jongleurs Comedy Club. Maria started it. She started it with 300 quid, riding her bike around London. Absolutely. So enjoy this candid conversation about my life and keep liking and subscribing. And if you want to share any comments, keep it nice. Happy to reply. Hi, guys. Before you get into the next amazing conversation with another amazing guest, I just wanted to tell you I have now moved over to Substack. So it's the Never Settle Podcast.substack.com. The reason I've done that is because of the increase in censorship I am finding on YouTube, and I'm worried that maybe one day they're going to deplatform me. So please head over to Substack and subscribe. I'm very new into it. It's growing. There will be a lot more content on there going forwards, and hope to see you over there.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Maria Kempinkska. I am over the moon, actually, to have my next interviewee. I reached out to her because I'm not only a psychotherapist, I'm also an entrepreneur. I ran comedy clubs and I'm still in the world of comedy, and I'll tell you about that another time. But I love people who not only can tell their story. Every person who's sort of trying to help others is what they call the wounded healer. Everybody has to go through stuff. And the more they go through, if they can turn it around and help others, that is really a big way to transform your life. So this isn't about me. I was on YouTube and I'm looking through a number of people to listen to and to be inspired by. And I came across this wonderful woman called Mel Clark. And on her podcast, she said, never settle. And I thought, absolutely, do not settle. There are times in your life where psychotherapy, and I've been through, I help a lot of people with psychotherapy. And sometimes it's not always on the inside. The outside impacts on you. And sometimes people give in too easily. And I don't mean that they're lazy or careless. They just don't know how to help themselves out of a situation. Partially, you do need to have that dynamic that goes, I don't care. I know that I've got to get out of this and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out of this. And then they find a way out. And that is Mel. So thank you, Mel, for doing this. I persuaded Mel to come on. We didn't know each other before this, but I'm really glad I've got to know you. And she is a wonderful warrior woman. So Mel, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for asking me. And likewise, we had a lovely conversation, didn't we, about a week or so ago. And it was obvious that we're sort of kindred spirits, that we very much see the world in a similar way. You know, you've had your hard times, I've had my hard times. And but it's the never giving up and the never settling. And you're an epitome of that as well. So thank you for the invite. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm delighted. And you've got a wonderful setting. So let's just, because everybody will look at your setting and say, wow, that looks amazing. So tell us about your setting.
So this is actually called the Stonebury Lodge. It's in my garden. It started off just as a bit of a dumping ground, and then a few years ago I converted it. And it's been lots of things. It was my yoga place. You can see at the back there, there's a little bar area which is called the Not So So Bar, which my son named. It doesn't really get used as a bar anymore. It's been an Airbnb, but more recently, it has now become a frequency healing pod. So you can see just behind me there, one of the columns on
Oh,
the side. Um, so it's the Orinoco pod, and I've actually had Malcolm on my podcast, the Never Settle podcast, who developed this. He didn't create the technology, but it was actually so the frequency healing that that pod gives off is the optimal health frequency. I'm not, technical or a scientist or anything else, but it was developed by a nuclear physicist
Mm.
who had been looking after obviously a nuclear plant, and part of that work was to keep the environment balanced. And through that work, he basically discovered this frequency healing, and he made it open source, so anybody can take that and do what they want with it. And Malcolm and his partner Kat developed the Orinoco pod, is what they call it. And so it's three columns that you sit in the middle of. You
Okay.
set, and it's not just about healing, because obviously your body will naturally rise to that frequency.
Mm.
But it's also about developing your connection with your higher consciousness. So they call it conscious tech, basically.
Oh, lovely.
And you set an intention, when you have your sessions,
Mm.
and which makes it even more powerful. So people have been having amazing experiences. A lot of people cry, in their first time. So it's recalibrating what need
Mm.
what needs to be recalibrated.
So let's find out how your journey has ended you for the moment here,
Mhm.
but you've still got somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And you're very purpose driven, which I love. But everybody starts somewhere very different, or most people start somewhere very different. So where was your starting point?
So I would say, like, when I was a young kid, I was pretty shy. I was probably shy until I was about 20, but my family, I'm one of four kids, and my mum and dad, they stay together through thick and thin. They never should have, but one of them. And so we used to hear a lot of arguing when we went to bed and that sort of stuff. And it was always about money. My dad was a self-employed bricklayer. And so there were times where he couldn't work because of the weather, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So that was very much part of the household. And I think from very early on, I sort of vowed to myself, I will never row about money. And so that sort of incentivized me to become, I believe anyway, ambitious, wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30, all of that sort of thing. So I ended up going to university, albeit I wasn't going to, and I ended up doing psychology and social policy, and I wanted to actually be a psychologist. But I loved psychology at A level. I hated it at degree. And by the time I finished, I was like, I taught myself out of it. So as you know, Maria, a lot of coaches and psychologists and things like that, they get the imposter syndrome. Who am I to help somebody else? What can I bring to the table? And that's what I did. I was like, I'm 23. If I was sat in front of a 55-year-old man who's got way more life experience than me, who am I to help him? And so I taught myself out of it. And I ended up falling into a career of sales. Everybody that ends up in sales, well, most people say I fell into it, and once you're in it, you can't get out of it because you've got that commission every month, and then you're tied into that commission because you're living that lifestyle. Anyway, I was also I joined a rock pop band in 1997 when I was 23. It wasn't my first band, but it was my first serious band. And and again, that was like I'd had an experience when I was at school and somebody said, "Oh Mel, you sounded shit," when I was singing, and it stopped me in my tracks. That one comment stopped me in my tracks for years and years and years. And so I had a serendipitous, and I've had many serendipitous little meetings or events. And it was a woman that claimed she could read palms and this, that, and the other. And she read my palm and she said, "You have a dream, and the only person that's stopping you is you." And I knew exactly what she was talking about. And I knew it was to do with the singing. And so I basically started looking at the classifieds as it was back there in the back of the Daily Telegraph that we've got here. And I found this advert, and it was a band called Champagne Hedgehog, joined them, and we did pretty well. We did some. I've just seen a white feather float past the window. That's so funny.
How lovely.
Um, and we did some recordings, we did lots of gigs, we got spotted, but then the drummer quit. And so things were never quite the same. We carried on, and then and then I basically got pregnant unexpectedly at the age of 25, and I was working full time. I was with my son's dad for a short time. We didn't last, and yeah, and then I was a single mum, and I was in this band, and I was working full time, and I think I got to when Jake was 2.5, or was it 18 months? And I think it was 2.5. And I basically said, I can't do this anymore. And I think the band had come to and it was coming to a natural end anyway. So that was that. So the music career, I always thought, oh, I'm going to get to Wembley Stadium and this, that, and the other. Came to an abrupt end, and and then life takes over. I'm a mom. I'm working. It's a million miles an hour, and I still had always in the back of my mind, I want to be a millionaire. I want to be in a position where I'm not struggling for the bills, and I'm not this and I'm not that. And my other main driver was my mum and dad. I always use this phrase, and she probably doesn't like it, but they didn't have a pot to piss in.
Yeah, yeah.
They had no
Mm,
backup. There was no
mm,
pension in
mm,
place,
mm,
and I was petrified of what was going to happen, as they got older and older. So at that time, financing, mortgages, all that sort of stuff was a lot easier to get than it is today. And I started to get all this stuff come through about property courses here, property courses there. So I started to do that. I dragged my brother into it. We ended up buying 3 buy-to-let properties in 6 months with none of our own money. You could do gifted deposits back then and things like that. And credit cards were plentiful. Um, and so that's how we did it. And we basically robbed Peter to pay Paul. It was quite a challenge, but we made it work. And then lost my dad in 2006. And it was one of his dreams with my mom to have their own place in Spain. It was never going to happen, but it was like a little dream that they'd got. And so I suppose I wanted to carry that on. And I started to get these emails about places in Spain and this, that, and the other. And I ended up, well, we went out first, me and my mom. We ended up putting a deposit on a place and then changed our minds. And luckily, we got the money back. And then we ended up,
mm.
Maria, what was I thinking? But me and my ex-husband and my mom, we ended up, well, it was me and my husband that did it, and my mom was sort of part of it. Um, we bought 2 apartments in a place called Los Montesinos in Alicante. Supposed to be buying a third apartment. Thank God we didn't. And that was in 2007. And honest to God, the whole thing was a setup. I know that now. I didn't know it at the time. And we got done over by Brits that were out there working, letting agents, rental agents. Then we ended up, one of our apartments was rented to a Bulgarian family who were running a crack whore den. And so we had so much crap.
Mm, mm,
And then the crash happened at the back end of 2008. And
mm,
so the expats that were going out and needing places to stay while visiting family and this, that, and the other, that all started to dry up. It got more and more difficult. And then by 2000, and what happened as well is I decided to change jobs. And it was the biggest mistake I could have made. And I was out of that new job within 6 weeks, and then I was in a crash, and then trying to get something that matched what I needed to earn
mm.
became impossible. And I was juggling a lot of debt. And so I basically ended up in a debt management program. I just had to sort of throw in the towel,
No.
and said to my husband, do you mind if I go part-time and try and pursue something I'm passionate about? So that happened, and then in 2000, and then we basically couldn't keep up with the payments on the mortgages in Spain, and eventually the bank closed our accounts. Couldn't send any money even if we wanted to, and I assumed at that point that you know that it had been repossessed, etc. And so that's sort of we used to get the occasional paperwork coming through all in Spanish, didn't do anything about it. That was obviously from 2010. And just assumed over the years, and then Brexit came, which we were thankful for because we thought we were off the hook, sort of thing. And it all just sort of went quiet until about a year ago, but whether I get into that or not. But um, so yeah, but that whole period left me absolutely paralyzed
Mm, mm,
for about 5 years.
mm.
I just got my head down. I did what I did. I wasn't looking at alternatives to make money. I felt like a failure.
Yeah.
I felt like it was all my fault.
Mm,
All of those times we went to Spain before we bought these places, drinking red wine,
mm.
living the life, not doing our due diligence, all of that sort of thing. And I took it all on my shoulders.
Yeah.
Um, and then in in 2011,
Mm,
sorry, no, it was the same year, so it was November 2010. I got married the year before,
yeah.
and in 2010, I had been going to an acupuncturist. I told you this story before. How all of that came about was very serendipitous.
Mm,
And she'd just newly qualified. She was doing this promotion, and it was 5 sessions. So, and because at the time I'd got acne rosacea, which I still suffer with, I was looking for something to resolve that. And she was a great woman. And we finished our last session, and she said, "Right, Mel, um, I'm not interested in treating symptoms. I'm all about mind, body, spirit, the whole thing.
mm, mm.
A lot of people will cut and run at this point because they're not willing to go in with whatever it is they're repressing and all that sort of stuff. But if you want to carry on working with me, that's what I do." And so it was only a few seconds of me thinking about it, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm good with that." And she said, "Okay, because I have to tell you, you are deeply unhappy." And I just sort of looked at her and I was like, "No, I'm not. I've only been married a year. I'm very happy, thank you very much." And she said, "I just have to say it as I see it. You are deeply, deeply unhappy." And I was like somebody just got a sledgehammer on my head, cracked me open, and these tears just came from nowhere. I've got goosebumps now thinking about it. And I was uncontrollable. I just couldn't stop crying. She had a another client coming in, and so she put me in another room and sort of had to leave me to it. And then the next 2 weeks were like a blur, really. I was like this whirling dervish of confusement and all this sort of stuff. And just to give you a bit of context, I fell in love with a guy when I was 20 years old, and it was a very up and down relationship, cat mouse, cat mouse, cat mouse. And I'd never got over that. He wasn't my husband. The man I married, I had a lot of love for, but I knew deep down it wasn't the same. And so when I was given that diagnosis, if you like, I sort of knew what it was about. But I'd been lying to myself for years. I'd created this mask. My life was good. It was happy. Me and John got on great. There were most of the boxes were ticked. And I was denying myself, and I was denying him as well at the end of the day. And so yeah, that was, I always say that was the start of the rest of my life. It took me another 2 years of pain, anguish, guilt, responsibility, going round in circles in my mind. But then again, another serendipitous thing that happened on New Year's Eve 2012, and we were getting the house ready. We had a load of people coming for a party, and we sat down at about 5 o'clock to have a chill out. And the night before, we'd been drinking red wine and talking till about 3 o'clock in the morning. And he brought up my ex, which he often did because he knew about him, and me and John had actually split up in the early days, and I'd got back with my ex, so that was always there. And he said something that night, or he said something when we sat down for that chill out, which I knew was a lie, and it was about my ex. And I just knew that it was a lie, but he was prodding and pushing. He was trying to get something out of me. And and I thought, right. And it was like, again, this chasm opened. You either walk through it with honesty or you close it back up and continue the lie. And I chose to walk through it with honesty, and I told him I didn't love him anymore. And obviously he was heartbroken. And all of the moments of dread of this moment, how it's going to be, the hurt you're going to create, all of the people that are going to be affected. It's not just us, it's our families, it's the
Mm,
people that came to the wedding, it's my niece who's my goddaughter, it's all these things. And you all the time you're putting other people's feelings before your own. And that is what I'd been doing, and holding guilt and responsibility, firmly in my mind. It wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. Yes, he was heartbroken. By the way, the party continued. I,
okay. Okay.
I did say to him, "Shall we call it off?" And he said no. Um, and he was you could see he was not himself. And then I will say by 12 o'clock, somebody brought out the tequila, and then it was the best night we'd had in a long time. And I think it went on to about 5 o'clock in the morning or something. But yeah, and so that was a difficult time, and it took another 14 months for him to leave
Mm,
this house. Because this was my house anyway. I bought this house, and it was challenging. He was depressed,
mm,
and I was the cause of the depression, but he was also looking to me to help with the depression, and I was like,
mm,
I
mm,
can't do that. It doesn't work. Anyway. And so that was early 2014, and then basically, I had a blast. I just felt like this relief, this burden I've been carrying all these years. And so I just stayed single for 7 years, not intentionally, by the way. I never thought I was going to be single for 7 years, but I got back into the real world, if you like, got a corporate job again, self-sufficient, earning good money, all that sort of stuff. And but prior to that, I had started to dip back into the self-development world again, and looking at property again, and looking at all these different things. And so I've always done stuff. I've done network marketing. I've done online marketing stuff. The property always continued in the background, me trying to think about different ways of doing property again. And and then in 2017. I was in a proper job earning really, really good money, and came across an opportunity, and it was online marketing. And it was basically you could either be an affiliate marketer, or you could use these skills to boost whatever business you've got. And it's boosting it online, and obviously creating a great income so you can ditch the rat race. So that's what I did. And it wasn't cheap. And but that whole journey, I met the most amazing people very spiritual. I'm very spiritual, very like-minded, people that weren't settling, trying an alternative, trying to do something with passion and purpose. And that's what it was all about. But when you go into that kind of experience, I mean, I didn't really know what I was getting into. Sorry. I think that was me, wasn't it? Let me just close that down. Um, I didn't know there was going to be a load of self-development included in what I'd invested in, which there was. But also it was breaking down these limiting self-beliefs. And leadership was a word that kept being used all the time. And I'm like, I'm not a leader. You see leaders as world politicians or head of corporations and this, that, and the other. You don't see a leader as little old me. And so that took a while for that to sink in, what that actually means. And really, a leader is somebody that's willing to put their head up above the parapet sometimes in whatever that looks like, and be a stand for who you truly are, really. And they say an expert is somebody that's only a couple of steps ahead of you. You know, you can be the big thing in SFM back then, it's not called that now, but was learn, do, teach. So you learn it, you do it, and then you teach somebody else. And that's the best way to incorporate what you've learned, and then keep taking it to the next level and the next level, and increase your expertise, if you like.
mm,
So that was a whole weird journey and a great journey. Did a lot of events around the world, and um, but and I was doing the affiliate marketing, which was very expensive on YouTube. When you're running adverts on YouTube, I don't know if anybody's ever done it, but it ain't cheap, and you've really got to learn your way around it to try and minimize the cost per clicks that you're getting. And so I was spending at least £1,000 a month on YouTube, and I was getting people signing up, but it wasn't covering what I was spending. And eventually, the job at the time, it kept changing, it kept changing. So my income was reduced, then it was reduced again. And I had to stop doing that. And then I'm just trying to think. Oh yeah. So in 2020, like a lot of people, I got made redundant from that job. And that I was told about that in the May. Obviously, we'd been in lockdown, hadn't we, and all that crap in March. And found out in the May. Eventually, I had to get a solicitor in the end to make it a fair deal. So I got a little bit more out of it. But in the meantime, me and the original guitarist from the band I joined back in 1997, we stayed friends for all these years, and we had a get together, and it ended up being totally different, and we ended up dating, which was very strange because I'd never looked at him in that way before. And I also knew like his history from his marriage, but it turns out I didn't know probably 9/10 of it. He told me a little bit. So I knew there were issues there. And anyway, so we got together, and it was obviously my first relationship in 7 years. And it started off amazing. It quickly the warning signs were there pretty early on that I kept choosing to ignore. And I'm happy to talk about this because a lot of people won't talk about this. So I knew that in his marriage, he had been emotionally and verbally abusive to his wife. He never talked about physical abuse. And I think I remember pushing it at one point right back in the early days when he told me about it, and he sort of skirted around it and this, that, and the other. And I was just like, okay, I wasn't sure whether he did or whether he didn't. But what I did know was he'd had a lot of counseling over the years. He told me that his parents used to beat him up when he was a child, and that he'd had to sign himself into care at the age of 16. And then he'd created this life he'd created for himself on his own. So I always saw that as very applauding, I can't think of the right word. But I saw it as fair fucking play to you, mate.
Yeah.
You've done all this. And so I had admiration for him in terms of what he'd done. And there was a reason why he'd been the way he was in his marriage, right? But he'd had a lot of counseling. And then early doors, only 3 months in, was the first time I got a drink thrown in my face, um, which he totally blamed me for because of the way I'd reacted to something. And what I didn't know then, but what I absolutely know now, is what a world-class actor narcissists are, how selective they are in how they remember things, how manipulative they are. Um, and he's also a psychopath that I now know. There is no remorse.
Mm.
Um, there is no compassion when things have gone the wrong way for them, sort of thing. Because I always saw him as this kind, person, and he was generous, and all that sort of stuff. So so I made allowances for that first time. It
Can
happened
I ask you,
again. Yeah,
can I ask you what triggered that? Let's go into this a bit because people never go into the trigger points that starts the whole ball rolling or the unveiling, let's say.
okay.
You had the glossy, nice face. Everybody has a persona. That's what you fall for. They know how to do it. We all do to some extent. If we don't have that, you're not going to fall for anybody.
Yeah.
And then the real them come out. That's really hidden. And suddenly he throws this drink in your face. What made him do that?
Yeah. Okay. Um, just to also give you another bit of context, there'd
Yeah.
been when we first sort of got together, which was random. There was a lot of love bombing that happened by text. I'd never experienced that, didn't know what it was.
Right, so it was quite intense.
It was intense,
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, he's very good with his words.
yeah,
It made you feel so special,
yeah, yeah.
like I was the only one, sort of thing. And so that took me all by surprise, and obviously increased my feelings, I suppose. And I'd always thought that he'd had feelings for me all these years, and this, that, and the other, and blah blah blah. So there was a lot of that going on. Um, he was also a bit broken, had been a bit broken. And so, me being me, I've always tried to fix people's broken
Mm,
wings,
mm, mm,
and wanted to help people, wanting to fix people, trying to get people to a different place. And what had happened prior to that was my one of my rentals, we'd had a nightmare with getting it finished before some students came in, and he'd helped. He'd had to get in, even though he was working full time. And fair play to him, he was up against the cosh. He, throughout that period, felt like I wasn't pulling my weight in all of that. My brother wasn't pulling his weight. He had a lot of shit to say about that. When that event happened, we were in Cornwall, and it was on a family trip. Everyone had gone, just left us there. And prior to that, he dislocated his shoulder. We'd been on a weekend away. He dislocated his shoulder by falling off a bloody chair, and was having issues with it. And he kept having physio, but it seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse. Anyway, he'd gone off to the loo, come back, and he said, "Jesus Christ, I've had a right old episode with my shoulder." And so I said to him, "Oh, Jesus," I said, "Are you okay?" He's like, "No." And I said, "Do you think the physio that you use, that you're going to, do you think she's making it worse?" I said, "Because seems to be getting worse."
mm, mm.
And he says, "You think you're a fucking physio now, do you?" I said, "No, I'm just saying, not all physios are equal. Maybe she's giving you some wrong exercises to do or something." Well, that was it. He was just like calling me everything for I know better than the experts. Yeah, and I was like, I'm saying this because of care. I don't know. I'm just saying maybe this is a thing. Obviously, we'd had a bit to drink as well. And because he was being so belligerent, and I just couldn't believe how he was attacking me for something that I was trying to help with. In the end, I think I ended up like really fucking, excuse my French, screaming at him because I was just like, what? Anyway, we left the pub, carried on the argument. He certainly wasn't backing down. He certainly wouldn't listen to what I was trying to say. And in the end, he walked off, right? We were walking back to where we were staying. And so I just had some time on my own, got a bit upset. Eventually, I started to walk back to the hotel. And as I was getting to the hotel, he was walking out. So he'd gone to the room, probably had some whiskey, come back out to see where I was, saw me. We got into the room. Clearly, he still wasn't apologizing or backing down. So I was not backing down, and got into bed. And he'd got this glass of whiskey in his hand, and he just threw it in my face. Um, I told him to get out of the bed. He said, "Piss off, you get out of the bed." And I think there was like a chaise longue in the room. So I think I got out and I slept on that. And then I remember the next morning we were traveling back that day. I was just in such a weird place, and went down for breakfast with my mom and him. And she was like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, and he kept saying, he said, "Look, you can't be like this all the way home, blah, blah, blah." When we got home and we dropped my mom and everything off, we stood on my driveway, and he had the audacity to say, "I'm not, you were screaming in my face last night." I was like, "Yeah, there was a reason for that." And he said, "I'm not up for that. I'll be running for the hills if that happens again." And he did it in such a way to make me believe everything was my fault, right? And I'd fallen for him. I'd fallen headline and sinker. And so I carried on. And then I think it was about 9 months later when the second one happened. And this time we'd come back again. It was after a holiday. We'd come back from holiday. We were sat. watching some comedy thing. Now, to give you some context here, 2020, I was blown wide open, like a lot of people, right? I was being sent videos about the elite, about paedophilia, all these different things, and going, what? 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 You know, and anyone that is resonating with that, you go down one rabbit hole, then another, then another, then another, and then you realize that our whole world is inverted, perverted, subverted. Everything we've been taught and told is a complete lie that we are actually still slaves, and all of these things. Now, he was not of that ilk. So it was creating tension between us anyway. And it was getting more and more difficult for me to watch anything on telly because I was like, he's an arsehole, she's an arsehole, this, that, and the other. And this particular night, I said something flippant about this comedian, which he took umbrage to. We ended up having a bit of a row. I took myself off upstairs and I went in the spare room. When he came up to bed and found I wasn't in his room, that was like rejection, right? So when he came in and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want to carry on the argument." He says, and he was drunk, he'd been drinking whiskey or whatever. And I'd got a pint of water next to the bed, and he picked it up and threw it all over me. Um, and he was shouting, and his son was staying with us. And I kept saying to him, Bailey's here. Shush, Bailey's here. Keep your voice down. And eventually that got through to him and he went off and went to bed. And I basically waited about 10 minutes, got myself up and drove home. And then when he woke up in the morning, realized obviously I'd gone and this, that, and the other. Um, he did apologize for that one. Um, it's all a bit of a blur now, but needless to say, we got over it and we carried on. And I would say in 20, so we started in 2020. I would say 2022, things were really nosediving. I was noticing his language towards me was just horrible. He kept using the C word. Um, then we went to Turkey. It was our first trip abroad because obviously everything had been in lockdown and all that crap. So we were dead excited to get on a plane and went to Turkey. The first half of the holiday was great. Never stopped laughing. But I was feeling sort of ill and feeling a bit weird while I was out there. And I was getting fed up of the all-inclusive as well. So it was this particular night, and I said, I'm not feeling great. I don't want to go down to dinner. Um, and I'd got a headache, I think. And he was a bit pissed off because he at that time was going through some stress and feeling a bit anxious and stuff, which he did suffer with. So, it was my fault that he had to go down on his own. Um, and when he came back up, I'd said to him, I said, look, I don't want to be boring. Do you want to go down? Because I knew there was a karaoke happening that night. And I was quite interested in going to the karaoke. And I said, are you sure you don't want to go to the bar? And he's like, I'm not bothered. I said, I just don't want it to be boring anyway. So we ended up going down. I ended up singing a song. Um, and then dragged him up to do another song. And then there was these guys that we'd met a few days before. We were chatting to them. It was there last night, and they were like, "Oh, let's go to the lake place," because on site there was this like lake disco place. And I just thought everyone was in agreement. As we walked out to head off, Matt was walking behind me, and he was like, "Oh, Matt," and I was like, "What?" He said, "I don't want to go for a fucking lake drink." And I went, "Oh shit, sorry. I just thought you did. I just assumed." And that was it. The whiskey was in my face. It absolutely blinded my eyes to the point where I was on the floor because I couldn't see. How nobody saw it, I don't know. And he just turned into this raving lunatic, right? And he was chasing me almost through the pool area. I was trying to get away from him. And eventually, I don't know why, but eventually he left me alone. And then I was sat on my own, freezing because it was in April. And this bar guy walked past me and realized obviously there was something going on. And then the next time he came past, he brought me a blanket, bless him. So I was like, thank you so much. And then I went back, eventually I went back into the hotel, got myself a drink. No, sorry, firstly, I saw a lady stood outside smoking. Now, I don't smoke anymore, but I have smoked. And because I was upset and stressed, I went up to her and said, could I have a cigarette? So we stood there talking, and the next thing I saw Matt hurtling towards me, grabs this bag out my hand, throws it on the floor, can't remember what he said, and then stomps off. This woman that I was with just looked horrified. And anyway, she went, "What the hell?" I said, "Oh, it's okay, whatever." And I said, "Can I have another cigarette?" And so she gave me one. And this time I went outside of the hotel and took myself away. And when I came back in, went to the bar, got myself a drink, sat there with a blanket round me. And next thing I see him coming hurtling through the door again, picks up the cocktail, throws it in my face. And goes. And so at this point, I go to the reception and ask if they could just put me in there's another feather just floated down past the window. Um, asked if they'd put me in another room, but they wanted to charge me X amount of hundreds of quid to do it, which I didn't have at the time. So eventually I went back to the room and he was still awake, annoyingly. And just it was all my fault because I was smoking. I'd been lying to him. I've been lying to him all this time because I'm smoking. No, I had a cigarette because you made me very upset. And eventually I just went out onto the balcony until he chunted himself to sleep, basically. Um, and then the last half of the holiday was horrible, and I was just not in a good place. I didn't have the money to take myself out of there. And but somehow when we got home, somehow we still got over it.
Mm.
And but like I said, it was getting worse and worse. The verbal abuse was getting worse and worse. And then basically it was his 50th in the September that year, and I planned a weekend in York along with a few other things. And do you know what? As stupid as it sounds, I think I stayed in that relationship because it was his 50th coming up.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
And I felt like because he got no real mates. He's got a couple of mates, but not, not people that he sees all the time. He's estranged from his family, hadn't spoken to his sister in 5 years. And I felt like if I ended it, then he's got no, and I just felt all of this again, responsibility. Anyway, long story short, went to York for the weekend, took our sons, first time the four of us had been anywhere together. And again, he'd been a bit abusive while we were there, which my son had seen. And then on the last night we were there, we'd been drinking, having a good time, but I knew I felt off as well. And my son and Matt's son stayed out longer. We went back to the flat that we were renting, and I'd fallen asleep in the taxi. And when this happens, I tend to not remember things, so you can sort of shake me awake and I'll go upstairs to bed, but I won't remember it. And that's what happened. And basically, he was stressing because we only had one set of keys, and what he was trying to get me to do was help him keep the door open so he could put the key on the car tire. So when the lads came back, they could get him. And of course, I was away with the fairies. And so the next thing I remember was basically my head whacking off the wall, um, and I fell to the floor, and then he punched me a couple of times. Um, and we were outside of the apartment, and I was slammed against somebody else's door. Whether anybody was in there, I'm not sure, but nobody came out anyway. And I remember I'd lost my shoe, and I was trying to get my shoe, and he wouldn't let me get my shoe, and then he wouldn't let me in the flat, and and all of this sort of stuff. And then the next thing I remember is waking up, hearing the lads come back. I was in the bedroom. Matt had obviously stayed in the lounge. And I remember looking down and seeing both my shoes there and thinking, oh, I've got my shoes. And then I must have slept again. And then when I woke up, he came in and out the room about 3 times. And then he basically got into the bed and said, I'm not fucking staying out there any longer. It's freezing. and I just turned my back on him. And and then he said, "Are you getting a shower?" And I ignored him. And he asked me again. I said, "Are you fucking joking me?" I said, "You're a fucking despicable human being, and whatever else I said." And then he's trying to blame me again. It's my fault because I wouldn't help him. And so yeah, so then I just basically got my clothes, went out to the lounge, was trying to figure out how to get back from York on a train. It was going to be an absolute mission. So in the end, I decided to try and hide because my head was swollen, my eye was swollen, but there was no bruising. Um, so I was trying to hide it, and the boys were so hungover and feeling sick that it was easy to hide it. And so we got in the car, we drove back, and yeah, got back here, and he just started gathering up all of his stuff. And then we stood in the hall, and I said, "You've really fucked it this time." He said, "And I can't do anything to change it." And that was all he said. And he went. Um, and then I was still in love with him. It didn't just go away.
Yeah.
And I wanted him to get help and support. And I tried, to have those conversations with him. And he just kept saying, "I'm not going to be held to a timeline. I'm not going to be held over a barrel," all this sort of stuff. Um, and this sort of went on. I mean, we'd split up, but this sort of went on over sort of 6 months. And then I did see him again. I had seen him a couple of times before, but I saw him again on this particular day. Knew he was drunk, should have got myself out of there. And basically, it happened again. He threw a whole glass of red wine over me this time. And then pushed me, and I ended up on the floor. This time I called the police. I hadn't called the police before. And after I'd called the police, I then called his son, um, and told him, and didn't know that his son was aware of what he'd done to his mother when they were married. And I didn't know the half of it, right? Um, and all of that came out afterwards. So So yeah, but what he said to me, so basically we were due to go away to Santorini, Matt and I, um, a few days after York, and obviously that never happened. And what I found out on that second attack, as I was picking myself up off the floor, he basically said, "Oh yeah, and I took Aileen to Santorini and to." So this girl was somebody he'd just met, I think. So a few days after he beat me up, the woman that he was supposed to love, he took some random woman to a dream location, which was my dream location. Um, and it just broke me because at that point I was just like, "You never fucking loved me at all." And I've had all this love and support and just wanting to, and I felt such a fucking fool. Because then after that, when I shared this with a couple of friends, they said, "I didn't want to tell you this, but he hit on me." I was like, "Oh my God."
Do you
You know,
think you know, the love bombing is an intense way to get your affection? Of course it is. And that's why people do it successfully,
yeah,
and that's what he did. And then, his real ability to hit you didn't come out till later, but you know, the pouring drinks over you is the first step. How much can she take? How much can she take? But he'd been, what concerns me about this, he'd been through counselling. And I think this is where counselling just doesn't address things effectively at times. And you've got to go to the right person for that, because you can't pussyfoot around people who've been abused. It goes into their DNA. They start thinking this is the right way to do it, because that would have happened to them at some point. And they've got to master that. They can't shy away from that behavior. It's the same, you came from parents that argue, lots of parents argue about how much,
yeah,
and then it goes into your own DNA. And to stop arguments is quite hard. So you get into that spiral. That's what happens. I've got to prove that I'm right. No, I didn't mean that. Yes, no, this is what I meant. And very often the other person doesn't hear. So that whole game that you were in, that dance that you were in, you just couldn't control or walk away. So when you did walk away, what happened at the end? How did you manage to get away from him? Because we're not talking, we can come back to how some people like him can be helped. But how did you get away? What was in your mindset to finally say, that's it?
Well, I think the I think the best thing he could have done is said what he said as I picked myself up off the floor, because it broke me. It made me realize what a callous bastard he was, and that he's a selfish bastard. I didn't even know what a narcissist was at that point. My friend had kept trying to tell me he's a narcissist. I was like, no, that doesn't sound like him. And then obviously at their worst, which is what I was experiencing, that's when you really see those traits playing out. And when I obviously contacted the police and went through all of that, I know he spoke to his son and said, oh, she's just done it out of spite and this, that, and the other. And he never once contacted me to apologize, to try and put right what was wrong. He never once has done that. And through the depression, because there was depression then, which I don't suffer with,
Mm, mm.
I I've done enough in my own journey and my spiritual journey to know that everything is a reflection of what's inside. I've always known that my self-love has been an issue, which it is for a lot of people, most people probably, whether you want to call it self-worth or self-love or self-belief. And I knew it was about my journey, and I literally needed that smack in the face, if you like, to wake me up to the fact that here I was again settling for a relationship that I knew wasn't right, because I felt like I was chopping off half my arm.
But did you know that right at the beginning that you knew
Yeah.
it wasn't right? You did. Okay, what was the
Well, not that it wasn't right, because I thought we could get through it.
okay,
I believe we were soulmates. I believed that this tension in the early days would be resolved.
what was the tension?
Just very different people. I'm a right-brained woo-woo.
Yeah,
He's a left-brained engineer.
right.
And he was open to some things, but a lot of the stuff, especially from 2020 onwards, that I was talking about, he couldn't get his head around it. He was like, just shut up. And he would say, you are like somebody standing on a street corner with a megaphone trying to get the word out to people, and people ain't listening to you, or you like, if you were a Jehovah's Witness, I'd shut the door in your face. And so I had to look at myself as well in all of that. And I was bullish at times. Probably like you, Maria, when you start to realize that the world is very different to what we thought it was, and that certain things were going to harm us, you want to help people and you want to stop people harming themselves. People ain't ready to hear it. And so
And can I come back to that moment when you are there? Because it's also, this isn't, you're telling your story, but it's also to help people identify problems that they could get into to stop them before they go down that slippery slope. Because when women do fall in love, and I do think it's a female thing, I don't care what people say, there's a total difference between men and women.
yeah,
And, you are guided towards that by your sort of hormones, oxytocin, and all that love, sort of that oxytocin is the togetherness hormone, the love hormone. And you've got a child, and that is constantly being released within women. So you want a relationship as well. And at the beginning, he was love bombing you and telling you all the things you needed to hear. And who doesn't need to hear that they're valued and loved and adored? That's quite natural. There's nothing wrong with that element of it. But he was using it, he was manipulating with it. And consciously or unconsciously, it doesn't matter at this point, because I think we make too many excuses for people's behavior. At the end of the day, he behaved badly. Yes, we can understand why. That's for the therapist to deal with, or for him to deal with somebody when he wants to change his life. But fundamentally, in life, there are rules that shouldn't be broken. And he was breaking all those rules.
yeah,
But you were trapped. And you were
yeah.
trapped by your emotions and trying to make the world better for him as well.
Yeah,
Where did that start? What was your relationship with your brothers like?
my brothers.
How many brothers? I'm assuming you've got one brother. How many
I've
other?
got two. I've got two brothers and a sister. Yeah. So my youngest brother is just a year younger than me. We were very close growing up. And then my brother, I would say my younger brother is very sensitive, and does have an anger problem at times. And so there's been some issues over the years, but we are good. We are good now. My older brother, 5 years older, we're good, but he's very reclusive. He's quite the introvert. I think he's on the autistic spectrum. But he's the one that I dragged into the property with me, and he basically just pretty lets me do what I want. And then if I ask him to do this, that, and the other, he'll go and do it, you know. And there's no drama with my older brother at all. In terms of Matt, because we've been mates, and then he came to me after his marriage broke up back in 2005. He came to see me. 3 stone lighter. He was like skin and bone, right? And he basically sat and told me what I believed to be the full truth. Told me about what happened when he was a kid, all this stuff that I didn't know. And so I felt probably at that point, oh wow, he's trusted me with all of this information. He must really value me. He must really value my friendship. Um, and we weren't close. We wouldn't see each other like all the time. It would be sporadic, but we eventually we did a bit of music again together. We did some open mic
So he
nights.
saw you. You were the lead. Yeah, so he saw you as a shining star that would get him out of where he was.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, he did say when we were together, I've learnt more from you than any of my other relationships.
Because you were the person that was going to guide him to a better place.
And that's what I thought was going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yes, but equally, what do you get from it? This is the whole problem. You can't just sacrifice yourself,
No.
for somebody else. And I'm not saying that you were deliberately doing it. We all have a need and we need to get that balance. But it got to the point where you were sacrificing yourself because of you felt that you could help him. Did you feel, right, I can turn this around for him. I can help him through this. Yeah.
If anyone can do it, I can do it. Felt like he'd had feelings for me for many years and
Yeah.
all this, that, and the other, you know. But to go back to your original question, which was about how did I get myself out of it,
Mm.
it was I'm thankful for the people that were around me. I'm thankful for the self-development I'd already done up to that point, the spiritual development, how I see the world. I know that this is just not it. You know, we are our higher consciousness and having a human experience. I knew all of that. And also I was working with some great coaches back then. I was actually working for them and part of their program. So there was an element of support in all of that as well. Um, and my friend who he'd hit on, she was just amazing. Like I was at her house having meals and drinks, and she just said, whatever you want to do, if you want to repeat yourself time and time again, just come round. It's fine. This, that, and the other. And she was really like my linchpin through that time. But ultimately, I knew that this was about my self-love.
Yeah, because in our journey, in our human journey, so we're all very conscious of our spiritual awakening. All the religions tell you that, let's be clear. And whatever you choose to follow. But the reality is we come in with a spirit and we have a journey and we've got things to learn. So our upbringing gives us a little bit, few hints. How you're going to get over this and how you're going to deal with that. And your parents give you your models, if you like. And then you're let out into the world to fend for yourself.
Yeah.
And you've got to take on whatever the world gives you. Your adventure is yours and yours alone, and you've got to deal with that. And
Yeah.
it's hard for women because we're not given the template in the world that men are given. And it's such a new territory for a lot of women. And so off you go. And you've now got to encounter men that at one point they love you. And on the other hand, they find you threatening Because if you are stronger than them, if you are the shining star, they want you to be the shining star, but equally they don't want you to shine more than them.
Yeah.
His type of man. Not all men are like this, because you've got somebody new now. And that makes a big difference. So you need a man in your life, especially if you're like you, who does want to shine. And that's absolutely right that you should shine if that is your nature. And that's your nature. You're a performer, you're a great performer. You do think differently and you do lead in a different way. And you need somebody that says, yeah, that's great. I love you for that. You go and do what you do, I do what I do. But he wasn't like that. So he needed you to be subservient to him. And that isn't good for any relationship.
No.
Unless that's your thing. Let's be clear. There are lots of women who are with the idol, the celebrity that support them, that stay at home. And, the celebrity goes off, and we're talking about men and women here. It goes off and she does the supporting role, which is wonderful. And that works for their relationship. But I think you were given the wrong terms right at the beginning. So if you see it as a business engagement, the contract was very different at the beginning to how it ended. He
Yeah.
was saying something very different to you at the beginning.
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. And that's why I say he was a world-class actor, you know. Um, and it wasn't until I was out of it and I had my months of processing and crying and talking and all of that sort of stuff and going within and realizing, Mel, you're still not loving yourself. Mel, you settled again. You have a never settled podcast. Your whole ethos in your coaching is not settling in that relationship again, not settling in that career, and you've just done it again. So for me, it became obvious quite quickly that this was just another fundamental part of the journey because I still hadn't resolved what
And
needed to be
you
resolved.
didn't learn everything you need to learn.
No.
And if we look at life like that, the terrible things that happen to people, and I know you've had a lot of difficulties in your life that you've got to resolve more than a lot of other people. And it's what do I have to learn from this? If you use that as a learning process, what is it? Because we might have the same experience. Let's say we have to go to court, both of us, for similar things. I'll have something different to learn from this than you. And it's what do I specifically have to learn from this? And how much more do I have to keep learning until once you've learned everything, your mindset changes.
Mm.
And it's hard. And women aren't geared, actually, we're not taught in our upbringing. Our kids will be, young women will be, that, to go to court to deal in the legal world as well, the outside world is quite hard as well. And not to self-sacrifice all the time, or to sacrifice in the right area for your children or for somebody who cares, but not for everybody. The Christian view is to be the Samaritan, to sacrifice and to help others, but you can't do it to everybody. And it's to be conscious that other people just don't want to be helped. And they have to go through their dark journey. It's like women who fall in love with murderers that are clearly murderers because
Yeah.
they even own up to it. And women going, no, they're not. No, that's just not right. That's a little bit crazy if you're in denial. But it's what did you learn about yourself? And was that the last thing you had to learn before you found your new partner?
Um, I don't think you ever stop learning, Maria. You
No,
know,
but on that level, on that
on
particular thing.
on that level, yeah, because what happened next, I mean, the whole going through the police and everything, it all got dropped from a technicality from a mistake that a copper made.
Mm,
So he never got prosecuted, which or never went to court, which I was absolutely gutted about at the time. However, that came about at the end of 2023.
right.
And so I thought, well, at least I don't have to take this into 2024.
Yeah.
I can leave it there, sort of thing. And then because I was on this other journey of, I don't just do one thing at a time. I've never done it. I like to have, apparently, I like to have a lot of drama in my life. So 2020, which woke me up to a lot of things, including the fraudulent legal system and things like council tax and mortgages and things like that. So I started to challenge my council tax, basically saying I'm not happy where this money is being spent. And I ended up, long story short, I ended up challenging that for a few years before they ramped up their activities, if you like. And so in August last year, well, if I take you a few months prior to that, you asked me what I've learned. Sorry, I haven't finished that question. I think once I was out of that relationship, got rid of the police thing, just decided, to get on with it, and realized that it was another lesson I had to learn. And basically, I suppose what it was I will never, ever put myself in the firing line for anyone ever again. It made me realize how translucent my boundaries had been.
Yeah.
Um, it made me realize how much, and I hadn't realized this, how much I was putting others before myself still, at the detriment to myself. And why the hell am I doing that?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and that saying charity begins at home, it's the same whether that's talking about money or whether that's talking about emotions. You have to fill yourself up first before, if you still want to help people, great, but you've got to be full before you do that. And I wasn't doing that. And also, I was clearly cutting off half my arm to suit in this relationship, which I was gutted that I was doing again. And I'd made so many excuses as to why I was doing that at the time. Well, he's a friend. I've known him for 23 years. He's had all this shit in his life.
Yeah,
And
but it's more to do with, you know, that element of trying to help somebody.
yeah,
That is the driving force for you because you're still helping people, but in a different way.
yeah.
It's not quite you totally invested in the relationship. It's a little bit more at a distance. You know what you're doing, there's a structure, and you can help them that way. But you don't have to go into a relationship to help somebody.
Yeah, and also it makes you question why you're attracted to those certain people. Like I then realized, so the guy I fell in love with at the age of 20, who I had that for over 20 years, by the way,
Mm.
in the background, always in the background, always bubbling away in the background. Um, and when I'd come out of the relationship with Matt and done all of that, I ended up weirdly on holiday with that ex from the age of 20 and his mother. Because we've stayed friends of sorts, and I'm friends with his mum. And they invited me out to have some sun. They were out there for a 40th, blah blah blah. And do you know what? It was like Turkey all over again. The first half of the holiday was fine. Then my ex, who was drinking a lot, like a lot, uh, blew up to his mum one night. Classic, coming out with all this stuff, telling me his mum's a narcissist, blah 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 blah. I fell for it all. He needed somebody to talk to. I was there for him. And then I think it was that night. So we'd been out at the beach all day and having lunch and this, that, and the other. And then I think it was that night we were at the villa, at the other villa, and having a good time and having a few drinks, and he jumped out at me as I came out of the villa, just mucking around, and just as a reaction, I pretended to kick him in the balls.
Mm.
Well. And by the way, I didn't kick him in the balls, but according to him, I touched the location, but it was probably like a feather. Um, and I was just mucking around.
Mm.
He literally lost his shit. And he lost his shit in front of his whole family. And completely overreacted and basically likening it to, he said, you've suffered physical abuse. This is physical abuse. He just went off on one,
Mm.
right? So needless to say, the second half of that holiday wasn't that great, and I could not wait to get home. But what I realized
Mm.
after that experience was that he's a narcissist, right? I'd never even put that together. But when I sort of went through a load of things and how he behaves and how it was always that push pull, and he admitted years ago that he did it on purpose because I broke his heart at one point, and that was it. He was intent then on just breaking mine, basically. Um, And then I thought, well, you can only know a narcissist when you are a narcissist. Like, I didn't even know what a narcissist was. He's calling his mother a narcissist. Well, how does he know that without, because you can only see in somebody what's in yourself, right?
Or what you've experienced, yeah.
Or what you've experienced. And so, yeah. And so I then started to have that epiphany. And I was like, right. So the two blokes I've fallen for, hook, line, and sinker, are fucking narcissists. What does that say about me? And then it's like, right, okay, so this journey, whatever I've signed up for as the sole contract in this journey, and the learnings that I'm here to experience and and break those cords. Um, and so when I met my current partner, Mick, he's very much in the world I'm in. He challenges everything. He's seen the bullshit and all that kind of stuff. And he was in a relationship. Well, let's be honest, he was married when we met, but he runs a group, that I joined, and so he would help me with the court stuff that I was going through at the time. And then, over time, obviously, um, realized there was a attraction there and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not saying we had an affair or anything. We didn't. His marriage hadn't been in a great place for a few years. She was not on the same page. That created a lot of problems. They'd almost separated years before, but they stayed together for the kids. And so it was his journey as well at the same time. So the marriage ended, and me and Mick, and I had an issue with that, massive issue to begin with, because he'd been in a 20-year relationship with that woman. And in my coaching, I'm saying, you don't go from one relationship to another. You go and have some time to yourself. The classic find yourself, have some space, do da 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 da. And so I was like this a lot. I was like, no, you need to be by yourself. The last thing you need is another relationship. So it wasn't great to begin with. I had all of this stuff going on in my head, feeling like I'm totally going against all my coaching that I would give to somebody else. My son had an issue with it. My mother had an issue. There was all this crap going on. And those are the two people closest to me. So I'm getting that resistance and not very nice, actually.
Mm,
And at the same time, having my own shit,
mm,
thinking, Mal, why are you doing this? Why are you getting involved with somebody that's just come out? And but he was persistent. And he's like nobody I've ever met before. We are like the same people, by the way. It's hilarious. But I say he's like me on steroids because he's got the energy of somebody of 10 times me, sort of thing. And he's just honestly, it's like nobody I've ever met.
mm.
Um,
What was it? What did you learn about yourself? You said, sort of about the two abusive relationships that they
yeah.
were both. There's different type of narcissists, which I'll come to in a minute. But what was it you learned about that aspect of yourself that you think you've learned? Tell me about that.
So I remember somebody saying to me fairly recently, when you get that lust, that chemistry, that like somersault tummy and all that sort of stuff, that apparently comes from a very nervous energy.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but this is what she was saying to me. And so that chemistry that consumes people, that makes people act stupid, um, or have affairs in their marriages and all that sort of stuff, that people are like, clinging on to. And I clung on to because I felt that with the guy I met when I was 20. Um, that that is it's a real thing, but where is that coming from? Is it coming from this this he's at a distance, therefore I'm like, trying to get closer, and that's never attractive, is it? Like, because he's wants his space, I'm clinging on, I'm the clingy person, all of that crap, not attractive, go away. But so that's like a false uh, reality, if you like, of thinking that this is how you feel. And it's classic, isn't it, with women? It's when you're younger, every woman loves a bastard. Why? Why do we love a bastard? Because it's that unpredictability, it's that excitement or whatever. And mostly it's heartbreak and the woman feeling like shit, right? But you sort of put that to the back of your head constantly.
But you didn't know at that time that that's what it.
I didn't know it at the time, but I know that now, and then it
But
repeats.
also coming back to the narcissism. So there's different types of narcissists. There's narcissism, I mean, the whole thing was based on that mythology of him falling in love with himself and hearing the echo, and then he drowns. So, we all are narcissistic up to a point.
Yeah.
We need to be adored. We need, otherwise, what's the point of being in a relationship?
Yeah.
And very often people learn that. And also, we should be adored as babies. So if you don't get it as a baby, and it's how much do you feel that need? But then there's malignant narcissists who actually manipulate you to get what they need. So they get it, they get the love bomb. There's also those that are covert narcissists that will use charities or good work to be seen. But I think there's something else that you're missing here. And I mean this in a very, very good way, that often when your family is busy, and when there's money problems, the family is busy because everybody's trying to make money. You're trying to make sense of the world. The kids are working, mother's working, dad's working, everything's a bit crazy. And there's a lot of love there, but if the arguments are there because of money, there's a lot of stress. And the talent that people have isn't being recognized. Not everybody has talent in the family, but talent felt. Like if as you're going along that conveyor belt of life, I believe in God, but God goes, oh, Mel, yeah, I'll give you some talent. There's your singing voice. Off you go. There's something for you. And the next two go, 3, 4, 5, 6 go along, and they get talent in different areas. And everybody has a talent, is finding out. But if your talent isn't being recognized and developed and supported, that's something that is so close to you. That's your identity. Creativity is our identity. Doesn't matter which way you do it. And they would give you an opportunity to have that identity. So you now sing. I said you sound like Chrissy Hine from Pretenders. Great voice. You're clearly good at what you do. You need to be out there in the limelight. Some people just naturally need that. And that's what you need. And for the moment, you were given that. And that isn't a bad thing. Narcissism isn't a bad thing because we need to be identified for who we are. Not everybody wants to be in the limelight, but you can handle that. And I want you to understand that that's a good thing. And that I know lots of people who love being in the limelight. Some people want to be in the limelight. Some people can't bear, like your brother. You said he doesn't want to be there. Great, but he compliments you.
Yeah.
Work together very well. But if you look at the makeup of your family, your younger brother equally had anger issues. And there was stuff that went on there. So there was a familiarity with anger that you also knew. And when you're in that world, you're not taught how to deal with all those issues. Whereas now, your son, for example, you've most probably spoken to him, he will understand a lot more than you did. And I still don't think people have recognized how to deal with anger. But just a point I want to make about your friend, when she said, come and see me after the breakup, talk as much as you want, get it out of your system. I love that about her because she's so right. I have clients who've been deeply traumatized, and to be hit by somebody that's meant to love you is traumatizing. It's a physical and mental thing that just knocks you for 6, and it goes throughout your body, and you're dealing with energy, and it changes your energy. Let people talk and talk and talk until finally they go, oh, I don't need to talk about it so much today.
Yeah.
But she's an amazing woman. So she's a natural healer. And I think we can all, as people, learn that. Let people talk about their trauma as much as they need to. And of course, they need professional guidance as well. But for you, I think you needed to know that you have value, but also as a performer, you have value. You need to be seen. There's something that glitters about you. And anything that glitters, people want to get to know. And I want you to understand that that is incredibly valuable about you, and enjoy that side of yourself. And that's what those two people couldn't keep away from you. They wanted it for themselves, and they weren't going to get it. Whereas your present partner doesn't need it for himself. He's got his own space, much like your older brother. He's got his own space. He knows what he's strong about, and he loves what you do, and I'm very happy for you. And that's amazing. So you've come through on one part of your life, an incredible journey. Not everybody has to go through the beatings you've taken, the humiliation that you've taken to get there. What would you say to about the legal system? Do you think it would have been better had he legally gone through that process? Do you think it would have served you well and him well for him to be punished legally?
Well, what's come out since? So a few months ago, I found out. So basically, my current partner. So this is where it got a bit weird. I didn't know this at the time. So when I was in that relationship with Matt, he used to talk about a guy from school called Mick, right? And this guy was great, got great guy, this, that, and the other. And me and him used to do this, blah, blah, blah. And when me and Mick obviously got closer and had conversations, and I told him about my ex and this, that, and the other, something happened, and he texted me and said, "Remind me how old you are." And I sent back saying, 1973, baby, currently 50 at the time. And he said, I said, "What about you?" And he said 1972. And when I read 1972, just everything went, and I went, "Oh my God." So I texted him back and I went, "What school did you go to?" Because obviously we all live in the same city. And he told me the school, and I went, "You know my ex." So he was the Mick that my ex used to
Used to
talk
talk
about.
about.
How weird, right? I had
It,
no idea.
but that's meant to happen for you.
Exactly, right? So there was that connection there. Um, and Mick is still in touch with Matt's wife.
Um,
And so we found out a few months ago that Matt has beaten up his 83-year-old father,
um,
and his father, pressed charges. Um, and he basically got off with community service. In my mind, I feel like he knows somebody on the inside, because what I've also found out is quite a number of women reported him to the police, and he's never been done. How? How is that possible, right? Um, and so I thought, well, full circle. The man apparently who used to beat him up is the one that has got him into the police and actually
yeah,
got him.
there is that divine circle, isn't there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also Matt's first wife, or only wife, should I say, ex-wife.
Mm.
Um, she is vehement that Matt never used to get got beaten up. She's like, that never happened.
She does. She believes that it's a lie.
Yeah. And so now I'm just like, I don't know what the hell the truth was. But anyway, whatever it was,
Yeah.
the father has done him. He only got community service, but at least that would have, and this is just on a purely selfish note, at least that would have smacked the smug look off his face, even temporarily. But like you said about the narcissist that will say, "I'm doing charity work, doesn't this make me amazing?" He'll probably be saying, when he's off to do his community service, that he's off to do some charity work or something.
So if you're warning, which we all need to warn people, whether it's the occasional male that gets abused by women. I know men who've been physically and mentally abused by women, but it happens more often the other way around. If you are talking to a woman to warn her, you're a woman who's been in this, what is the sign that you've got to step back, in the beginning of a relationship, just step back and go, whoa, what is going on here? But what are the other signs you would say
Well,
would stop you from falling into that space?
I think, and unless you have that true sort of self-love for yourself, this could fall on deaf ears. But essentially, those warning signs, and they're warning signs, they're red flags, that behavior is shit. When they call you a C or a B or whatever, that's not from a place of love. When they throw a drink in your face, come on, you know, that is not from a place of love. And it doesn't matter how much you wound them up to that point, it's not acceptable. Um, I think it's so easy, especially when as a woman, like if there's ties to kids, if you're with that partner and you've got children together,
Mm.
that makes it even harder. I didn't have that situation, but I still stayed because of some misplaced responsibility and loyalty to that man I've known for 23, 24 years already, who I think's had a terrible life, tried his best to pull himself out of it, and all of that, and seeing the good in all of that. The thing is, when you're an empath and a kind and genuine good person, you can't imagine that somebody else would be thinking or feeling a different way. But
And yes, they do.
trust,
And the
trust
trouble
me,
is,
ladies, they do. Yeah.
the upbringing that people have impacts on their lives, as it's shown with him. He's a very good example of that. Whether he really was beaten up by his father, and then in the end, he actually beats up his own father as an elderly person. Now, you know, who knows what sort of relationship they had, but to take that and do that, there are behaviors that must not be engaged with, and that's one of them.
Mm,
Just don't use physical violence
yeah.
unless you've been trained, and you know how to use it and can restrain yourself. So in martial arts, you're not only taught how to use your physical ability to disarm somebody, but also how to restrain yourself because you have the power, you have the knowledge. But he is abusive in every part of his world. He doesn't care. And that now should never be accepted.
And he's a bully because anyone that he's hurt is smaller, weaker,
Yeah. And he chooses the person accordingly. But you now have come through this, you're stronger,
Oh, yeah.
doing your energy work, and you're doing a lot of other things.
But it's also allowed me to see the value I've got. So my new partner, Mick, okay, it was a struggle in the early days because I had a lot of stuff,
Mm.
but now we are so many months in, and I just see him for the beauty of who he is. He has his insecurities,
Mm.
and
Well, we're human
and
beings.
and he acknowledges that, and we know that. However, like you said, he absolutely allows me to be who I am 100%, 100%. Even if I get a bit shitty sometimes or a bit agitated, menopause ladies, um, he sees it for what it is, and he doesn't take offense because he knows it's because I'm stressed, or it's because of this, or it's because of that. He is the one, my podcast. I wasn't really doing much on YouTube. I was not really. So my guests now are people that are standing in what we call the truth movement or whatever, people that are trying to get the actual narrative that they believe in out into the world without being suppressed. It was him really that gave me the encouragement to really go for that. And as such, like I said to you the other day, I think I was on 800 subscribers and I'm now on 7,200 or something, and it's just growing organically because I'm standing now in my truth. And
And you're
I'm,
allowed to say what you need to say. And we
yeah,
all need people around us that protect us and support us for that.
yeah. And
And
he's
well
not,
done.
yeah, he's not, I can't think of the word. I don't know what's going on with my brain today, but he's not intimidated.
No, and
He loves it. He
I
sees it
love that.
amazing. Yeah.
And
And he
I want people to understand that are watching this because we're two women, sort of over the age of 21, just. But, we have experienced things in life. And I want, and you do, want people to know that you can get through this. And even if a man has treated you badly, there are great men out there as well. You've got to, sometimes you're learning something, perhaps in a hard way, and you can get through it, but you didn't stop and you found somebody.
Do you know what? It's like, they come when you're not looking, right? I didn't know how I was going to trust, I just didn't. And there's other considerations as well. As somebody like me, the whole jibber jab and all the rest of it, you've got that as a concern and blah blah blah. And how am I going to meet somebody and all this stuff? And and there he was running this sovereign group, and helping me with all my court stuff. So I knew exactly where he was at with things. And he is like me. He's convinced we're twin souls. We're so similar. He's adventurous. He's spontaneous. Wants fun. All of these things that was a real drag really with Matt. And I was putting up with it for various different reasons. But and I think also what he's taught me. and what I've learned about myself. And this is where I've had my awakening about the past two narcissistic relationships, realizing that that was all built on bullshit, really. It's all built on bullshit, and it's all built on my limiting self-belief and self-love. And so I've been able, for want of a bit corny phrase, open up more like a flower, right? And be more accepting that, okay, I am pretty amazing. I am pretty amazing. And why shouldn't I say that? And somebody's recognizing it in me, tells me every day. Um, and it was a bit much to begin with. I'm not gonna lie. I did struggle. I was just like, chill out. But the more I've got used to him and his personality and his infectious enthusiasm and his energy, the more I'm okay, this is cool. This is all right. Like this, and he's just beautiful, and he's just so thoughtful, so kind, so helpful, literally treats me like a queen. What's not to love?
I love that. And so, in your life's journey so far, your adventure, let's call it, which I like that term, you start off in one place, and our job when we come out of our parents' nest, if you like, is to recreate our lives, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you have to go through hardship. That's what the Greek mythology is about. It shows you that hardship happens, but no, mostly it happened to men at that time. Now it's happening to women as well. And your story is one of those mythological stories. And let's see where it takes you from now. So, but people can contact you as well about for your energy healing, can't they?
Yeah. So, crikey, I'll have to give you the link actually
Give
because
us the link and I'll put them onto that.
yeah, because I've still not because I've been so busy with other things. I've still not put it on my actual main website, which is
Okay.
the melclarkcoaching.com. I've got my Reiki on there because I'm a Reiki practitioner. But so yeah, so I was building my coaching up and stuff. But really, with what's happened over the last 18 months with the legal stuff, the court stuff, the challenging stuff, I found myself in a whole new world, really. With the podcast and people reaching out for help in all of those sorts of areas. I don't know where it's going to go, but this feels like where my truth is. And obviously, the frequency healing has come in, another serendipitous meeting. I experienced it myself with my son. We both had an amazing experience with our free sessions. My son's been struggling for 2 years with anxiety, panic attacks, and I'm not saying he's healed, he's not. Um, but in that initial session, it was the first time he'd been able to fully breathe into his lungs for 2 years. And he was just like, whoa. He's still got a way to go. He's got a lot of limiting self-beliefs to work through.
But
Um,
sometimes you're limiting, you can't recognize your limiting self-beliefs until they occur. There's
yeah,
no prescript, there's
no.
no template. And you have to go through these terrible times sometimes to awaken that and find your boundaries, which is what you did. But your energy healing gives you that ability to balance your life, to balance your internal world, the energy world as well, and allow emotions to come out as well and settle you. And then what happens to you is having the right people around, which you do have, to help you to raise you up as well.
Well, I can only assume, Maria, because I've been I was a big Abraham Hicks fan for many years, although I don't know whether she's doing anything now, but um, it's all of that changing your frequency, so you are raising up, so that you're then attracting different people, right? And I think through that journey of my depression and then bringing myself back out of it with the love and support of others it enabled me to start putting myself first. My frequency started to rise. Although being in the court and the legal stuff is pretty dark at times, but at the same time, it still feels like a truth for me. And so, because I stepped into my authenticity even more so, without worrying about what other people are going to say or think, and then being in a tribe of similar minded people, then you're affecting each other at that point, and obviously the thing with me and Mick, the attraction grew and grew, and because he is such a supportive and an amazing being, I can't fail but to keep at that level, and at that point, um, and knowing everything I've been through and all the help I've given people and tried to give people, I think I just got to a point where I was just like, it's my fucking time. Why shouldn't I be
Absolutely.
having this, right?
Absolutely. So Mel Clark, I'm so glad you never settle. And we'll speak again. I know we will.
Definitely.
And for the moment, this will be the end of our very first discussion. There's so much more to say, but we'll do this again. Thanks, Mel, so much.